It's with great pleasure I present to you Mickey G and Shubs, presenting on Catch Me If You Can, exploring the impact of ephemeral vulnerabilities. If you give them a big round of applause, guys.
Cool. All right, so we're going to talk about ephemeral vulnerabilities, but by way of introduction, so my name is Gianarakis. I'm the CEO of AusCERT, formerly of Spider Labs. I've done a bunch of presentations. You've probably seen some. AusCERT was also in there as well. And I'm one of the organizers of Sec Talks and Australia's greatest conference, TUSCON.
Hi everyone, my name is Shubham, Shubham Shah. I'm the CTO of AusCERT. I used to be a senior security analyst at Bishop Fox, servicing Fortune 500. And I'm in the HackerOne Top 50, so I do a lot of bug bounty hunting day to day, and also the co-founder of Hackers Helping Hackers as well. So to define an ephemeral vulnerability, when we talk about ephemeral vulnerabilities, what we're really talking about are vulnerabilities that are only existing for a short period of time. That may be a couple of hours, that may be a couple of days, but an ephemeral vulnerability at its core is not something that you're going to see in an environment consistently. It's something that either comes and goes, and we try and detect that as best as we can. So that sounds pretty straightforward, but why do they exist? Why is this a problem? And how commonly do we find them? And what really is the impact? Are we just trying to come up with a word, or is there actually a real impact here from ephemeral vulnerabilities? And really, thinking about all these questions, doing bug bounty hunting for almost all of my security career, I've realized that most of the bugs that I find are usually due to things that are being deployed constantly and quickly. When things come out, things are changing all the time. And that's something that we've learned a lot at AusCERT and what we try and bring back. But ephemeral vulnerabilities are definitely real, and today we'll go through a bunch of examples of where we've actually found ephemeral vulnerabilities in the wild. In these examples, they're quite critical, so we really hope that they'll demonstrate the impact of what ephemeral vulnerabilities can lead to.
Cool. So what are the key drivers of ephemeral vulnerabilities? So, as a concept, it's not necessarily a super unique or new idea. Any bug essentially can be ephemeral. That said, ephemeral vulnerabilities, at least in our experience, are becoming a lot more prevalent. And while you can't really pinpoint a single root cause, based on our experience looking for these bugs across like a number of bounty programs and organizations that we work with, there are some common elements that are really kind of driving the increased prevalence of these sorts of bugs. So at the end of the day, vulnerabilities, generally speaking, are a reflection of the current development practices and technologies. So recent years have seen some shifts in this regard. So, cloud-first architectures, agile development practices, and things like DevOps and continuous deployment. And these trends have led to three kind of key outcomes. One being larger and more fluid attack surfaces, and also like a blurring of the line between development and production. We see a lot of assets and applications being developed kind of live on the internet. And then also, as Shubs mentioned earlier, like a rapid pace of development and change. And this has led to a bunch of new challenges in terms of securing these sort of more modern architectures, and traditional approaches have kind of failed to adapt. And this can be exacerbated in larger organizations as well that have somewhat sort of complicated structures, multiple subsidiaries, different teams, different capabilities and budget. And this is what's really led, at least from the research we've done, into the rise of these ephemeral high-impact vulnerabilities. So to move on to some examples, like we're hackers, right? So we're always of the opinion that the best way to demonstrate something is to show it. So that's what we're going to do. At AusCERT, we perform continuous security monitoring for a number of large companies, as well as Shubs mentioned earlier. The team is very heavily involved in bug bounties, and we look at a large number of bug bounty programs. So all of what we're looking at has driven this research and these outcomes. And looking at these companies at scale, we've seen many examples. So we'll go through a few of them now.
So the first example, I often like to say that this example is the afternoon drinks on the Friday, where you've got an engineer and everyone likes knocking off on a Friday. It's a principle we often see applied in most working weeks, and at scale, what we found is that we actually have an uptick of bugs on the Friday night. So we found much more critical bugs during the weekend, and our engines have picked it up much more often, because we found that on Fridays, people tend to deploy code and kind of forget about it and come back to it on the Monday. It's very possible for this to happen, and we've seen it in many large organizations. So in particular, we were notified about an asset that was responding very differently to how it was the day before. We visited this one subdomain, which was like org-admin.target.com on a Friday morning, and it gave us a one login prompt. Now, one login is a SSO solution. You normally put one login in front of very sensitive applications or any applications that are meant to be internal or only only accessible by your employees. And it normally can be put either at the application layer or at the reverse proxy layer. So it depends where you're putting it, but you can apply it in many different places to get this authentication flow. In some scenarios, though, what we found is we were continuously scanning this, and one day it was responding with one login, like you saw on the previous slide. The next day, it responded with the full-fledged admin panel. One login was completely bypassed. There was no necessary need to go through one login. There's no need to do that. It would just take you straight to the admin panel. You're automatically logged in as a super admin, and you've got access to every single customer for this company. And this was a huge bug. Like this has a staging instance, which had access to all the production data, which is also something we see a lot as well these days. So in this example, on the Friday morning or afternoon, someone had changed the configuration for one login for that host particularly, so it didn't require one login anymore. And because of that, and we detected that change, the day after we were able to access a highly sensitive and critical admin panel.
So example 2, we see a lot of ephemeral bugs in automated processes. This is a really good example. So this is actually a bug in Slack. So it's an exposed Git repository which led to leaking of source code and secrets. So we set up AssetNote to continuously monitor assets owned by Slack. The platform discovered like a number of domains, including Slack-reader, Slack-files, and Slack-core. And then, doing the recon that we do, we collected thousands of subdomain assets for Slack. And then, we continuously tested them for vulnerabilities. And for a short period of time, I think it was only a matter of like hours, right? A Git repository was exposed in the web root, as you can see in the screenshot. And this actually contained the source code for Slack's web application. The source code was 1.6 gig in size. Like we pulled it down, we cloned it. But the interesting thing about this particular Git repo was it had 300 hard-coded credentials for multiple services. It was literally the keys to Slack's kingdom. So we had Dropbox, Zendesk, Salesforce, AWS, OAuth, the works. Pretty serious bug, to literally just be out there on the internet. And so Slack rotated all the credentials, and they fixed the issue. And we really don't envy the poor guy who had to rotate 300 creds. I think it took him a little while. But the interesting thing about this issue, right? So it was ephemeral. So it came up under those subdomains, for a short period of time. It was picked up again. So initially, they were notified of it. They fixed it, and the sort of initial view was, oh, this was just something that a developer has made a mistake, right, and exposed this when it shouldn't be. But we sort of monitor continuously, and this actually popped up again a week later. The exact same assets, the exact same pattern, the exact same bug, and the exact same time frame. And what this indicated was that this is not really a one-off mistake, but rather indicative of a deeper process issue. And so we see this a lot with ephemeral vulnerabilities, that they're often overlooked for various reasons. We'll get to some strategies at the end, but they're often baked into sort of automated processes as well, where people haven't really sort of flowed it through and had a look at it properly.
So for the third and last example, I just want to talk about a scenario where we found keys to the kingdom one more time for a big bounty program. And really, it kind of revolves around the fact that today we have very complex front-end frameworks. Today, we are developing front-end frameworks like pancakes. There are so many different tools required to even get a front-end application up and running today. And as a part of this, one of the most popular tools that's used is Webpack. Webpack is used to compress everything down, bundle everything together, and then serve it to the user. In the last year, we've discovered at least 2 instances where developers have accidentally bundled production secrets in the front-end code. And this happens more often than you think, just because of the tiny mistake you can make to lead to that point. And production secrets, they should never be in client-side code. Client-side code is accessible by usually everyone, and anyone can go through it and see if there's any secrets inside. So really, client-side code shouldn't be containing anything like that sort. So in this example, we were monitoring a particular JavaScript file over the span of a couple of months, and we were monitoring for new API endpoints all the time. But One day, what we found is that the JavaScript file itself, at the very bottom of it, if you just scroll down, it would reveal all these production secrets. These secrets look like this when they were beautified. So you can see here, it's got the AWS access key, the secret keys for the private keys for the server, and even the session secret as well. This was included in the front-end code for this website, and I don't really think the developer knew about this at all. So once I found these keys, naturally I tried to escalate, see if I could do anything particularly, but I reported it straight away. These keys initially, they didn't let me do much. They would let me sign a URL on CloudFront, and I didn't think that that had that much impact whatsoever. And this kind of also goes to show in bug bounties how it's a two-way thing where, in this scenario, I thought that the keys that we had found were very low privilege and didn't have much impact. I submitted it anyways, expecting a small bounty. But it turns out they paid me a 10K bounty for this. And I was like, okay, wow, why is that? Why is this finding so critical? And apparently it turns out those keys would let you access all of the PII for this company if you just knew how to do it in that particular way for AWS. So in this scenario, the keys that were only up for a couple days, and it was an accident. I ended up talking with this team on HackerOne. The member of the team who published it didn't realize that he was including the production config.json file. He was just trying to include all the JS files. And as a part of that, it got bundled together, published to the internet, and we got access to everything basically with that. So that's the third example of the ephemeral vulnerability.
Cool. So now you've seen some examples and how sort of ephemeral vulnerabilities can kind of manifest themselves in an attack surface. We're now going to go over some strategies and techniques to mitigate these ephemeral vulnerabilities. So, most organizations lack visibility into these issues, and including, large, well-funded security organizations, right? Traditional thinking around, identifying vulnerabilities and remediating them hasn't really adapted to completely address all these sorts of issues. And there are three key improvements that we recommend that organizations can make to address these issues and to find them. So the first one being improving asset awareness. The second one is shifting to a continuous assessment / monitoring model and mindset. And then the final one is focus on impact. So when it comes to improving asset awareness, we are not the first to say this, and we probably will not be the last. You cannot protect what you don't know is there. Most organizations really do struggle with understanding the full scope of their attack surface. And the modern development practices and the trends that I mentioned earlier have just exacerbated those issues. Many companies now have very large, fluid, and rapidly evolving attack surfaces, and they really have little visibility at any given point in time, to what they're exposing as part of that attack surface. The question is, right? The golden question is, when we ask a company how many AWS accounts they have, the answer is always wrong. It's never right, because you just don't know. People can buy AWS on a credit card, spin something up. The reality is there's a lack of visibility. So what are some strategies that we recommend to improve your asset awareness? So the first one is automate. Depending on your organization, without automation, you're likely going to struggle to keep up with the pace of change. A point-in-time list of your assets that is out of date in a week isn't all that useful. And that's how quickly these things can change, as we sort of saw in some of these examples. They're up and down very quickly. Don't rely on being told what you have. Having sort of a list in a spreadsheet that you've sent around to your organization, they say, oh yeah, these are the ones we've got. Don't rely on that. Focus on aggregating asset data from technical sources. So Route 53 is a good one if you're on AWS, Cert Transparency, DNS, AD, etc. Take those as your source of truth, aggregate them into one list that you can then work off. Take an outside-in approach. A good place to start is focusing on what is in your external attack surface and then work your way in from there. You'd be surprised what you have exposed to the internet. Move beyond IP-based thinking. So really, you will see in some of these examples, these are all application security issues. This is commonly where ephemeral vulnerabilities exist, and particularly in organizations that are doing a lot of development in their attack surface. So understanding your application assets is key, and obviously the associated attack surface with that. And then seek out context. So having a good holistic list that you've sort of automated and you're taking from all these sources, that's a really good start. But where you see a lot of value is looking at the context. So, understanding what technologies are running on all those assets, understanding the interconnectedness of those assets is also very key and very helpful in finding ephemeral issues. Adopting a continuous assessment mindset. One of the things you might have noticed about all these bugs is that it came because we were constantly looking at these assets. And so this is, when you're looking at, ephemeral vulnerabilities, that's key. So, traditional thinking is kind of counter to that, right? Typically, you run a vuln scan or you do a pen test, and you get the list, and then you go and remediate them, and then rinse and repeat in like 6 months to a year. And if you've got a really highly fluid and evolving attack surface, the approach can't keep up. The ephemeral vulnerabilities show up in the gaps, right? And depending on your attack surface, even once a month might not be continuous enough. The bugs that we showed, they're typically a matter of hours or days that they're up and they're exposed for. And as you saw, like the impact is great. So doing this continuously is really important. Focus on, at least daily, or more ideally, if you can make it work, hourly vulnerability discovery. And here's an example of what I was talking about, right? So you have like a vuln assessment, you might do that every quarter. Let's say you do a pen test, a couple of times a year. And then in the gaps, that's where the ephemeral vulnerabilities are, right? And that's all around visibility. And the final strategy and recommendation would be to focus on impact. Right? So it's really important to focus on security impact when you are trying to adopt a continuous security mindset. The first reason being, it reduces the overhead. Don't bite off more than you can chew. Focusing on too much at once increases the overhead, and you won't get value out of that approach. Shifting to a continual approach means signal is really important. And focus on the stuff that you're concerned about. So we saw, say, admin panels, right? If you've been owned by that before, if you've seen that before, just focus on looking for admin panels continuously across all your assets. Don't focus on everything else just because you can. Focus on what's going to have impact for you. Scalability. And this is the other reason why you want to focus on impact, right? If you have a particularly large attack surface, you're not going to be able to handle that scale continuously if you're wasting resources looking for stuff that doesn't really matter, that's not really going to get you owned, and that's not really a big risk if it's out there. And then finally, agility. So being able to respond to ephemeral vulnerabilities quickly is really important in terms of minimizing the risk. Yes, they're short-lived, but they're often high impact. And if it's something that would have been up for days, but you can make it be up for or only expose you for an hour or two, that's a win, right? So focusing on the impact helps you be more agile. And yeah, that's really the end of our talk. Any questions?
No question. Here we go. One moment.
Thank you. So you've got hourly routine to do your monitoring. How do you then do the alerting, and how much context would you provide in those alerts about the problem in the alerting mechanism versus, say, hey, we think something's screwy, go investigate?
Yeah. So we use our own tooling for this, and how we've got it set up, our tooling has pretty granular settings around notifications, but we have it piped to Slack. And so we have it where new assets are batched, and new vulnerabilities are sent immediately, and it'll have enough context for us to be able to go like, okay, that's it. And then for our sort of commercial product, I don't know, do we have a commercial version of it? I don't want this to be a pitch, but like it has a bit more granular settings that you can kind of tweak. But yeah, it is actually really important because you can get notification fatigue when you're looking at all this stuff, like new assets, new issues. That's why, like what I said, like focus on the impact, right? So you don't want to be bogged down with stuff you don't care about, that you're not going to react to, because then you're going to miss the stuff that you want to react to. So yeah, notification fatigue can be an issue if you're doing this approach, but it's really important to
I remember when I first started AusCERT, at the beginning I used to love getting notifications, and then I think almost 6 months into development I'd get notifications all the time where they didn't mean anything anymore. So we did have to tackle the idea of making these notifications worthwhile. We batch them up in a way that it doesn't annoy you and make sure that the signal still remains.
Yeah, and it depends on what you're trying to achieve as well. Like one of the great things, if you do focus on the impact and get high signal, is you can work with your dev teams, because they're the ones that are pushing out these ephemeral issues. If you have something that you can kind of, in whatever system that you choose or however you construct it, that is high signal enough that you can send it straight to them, that's like, you know, the ideal scenario, and they can just fix it straight away and you give them enough context.
Yeah, yeah.
Michael?
One question here.
So you talk about mitigation being around sort of mostly process related, and I'm just curious, in your scanning, are you fingerprinting these systems as well? And have you identified any particular stacks or technologies that are, you know, where this is showing up more than others?
Yeah, that's a good question, actually. We do fingerprint all of our stacks, so all of the assets that we've got inside. We see where all the technologies are running, what's more popular than others. Often we find these sort of vulnerabilities pop up on more modern stacks like Express.js, Node.js, using, you know, popular front-end tools as well. Really, it's more the modern applications that we're seeing this pop by in, where there's a CI/CD process that's been formalized, everyone's pushing to production all the time, and even when there's staging environments that are up on the internet that we shouldn't be able to access all the time.
Yeah, I wouldn't say though that these bugs are necessarily a symptom of the technologies. It's more the technologies themselves are indicative that they adopt certain practices, which are more likely to lead to these issues. So they're more likely to be developing live. They're more likely to be pushing stuff rapidly and have that more DevOpsy mindset than like a traditional like Java enterprise shop, right? So it's probably, you know, even though we are seeing like the trend with the technologies, it's probably more of a symptom of those issues rather than the root cause itself.
Any further questions? Michael, may we ask what is the name of your commercial package that you have?
Sorry?
May we ask what is the name of the commercial product that you still have?
Yeah, so it's Asset Note Continuous Security. If you want to have a chat to us afterwards, come see us. We'll probably be at the bar, so you know that's usually where you can find us. And you can visit our website, assetnote.io.
Thank you very much, guys. If you can give a big welcome applause to them.